Arthur Sterling, a name whispered in boardrooms with a mix of awe and dread, presided over an empire built on steel and ambition. His reputation preceded him like a cold front, chilling the air around even the most seasoned executives. He was a titan of industry, a man whose net worth was measured in dizzying figures, yet his world was a monochromatic canvas, devoid of the vibrant hues of human connection. From his penthouse atop the tallest skyscraper, the city lights below shimmered like scattered diamonds, each one a testament to the wealth he commanded, yet they offered no warmth, no solace to the man who owned them. His life was a meticulously orchestrated symphony of acquisitions, mergers, and ruthless negotiations. Every waking moment was dedicated to the relentless pursuit of more power, more influence, more money. This insatiable hunger, however, was not born of simple greed, but rather a profound, gnawing emptiness within. There were fleeting, unwelcome flashbacks that sometimes pierced the impenetrable armor of his resolve. A child's laughter silenced abruptly, the fading scent of a beloved perfume, a fragile porcelain doll shattered on cold marble. These fragments of memory, though blurred by time and fiercely suppressed, hinted at a past trauma, a loss so deep it had carved an unfillable void in his soul, which he now attempted to pave over with gold. Arthur's demeanor was a fortress. His eyes, sharp and calculating, rarely betrayed emotion. His voice, a low rumble, commanded attention without needing to raise its volume. Personal connections were an unnecessary luxury, a weakness he could ill afford in the cutthroat world he inhabited. Friends were liabilities, family a complication. His vast mansion, a monument to architectural grandeur, echoed with an oppressive silence, a stark reflection of the man who resided within its opulent walls. Servants moved like ghosts, anticipating his every need, yet never daring to engage in conversation beyond curt affirmations. He dined alone at a table that could seat 20, the clinking of silver on china the only sound in the cavernous room. The endless pursuit of wealth served as a potent anesthetic, dulling the pangs of an inner void that threatened to consume him. He rarely paused to reflect, to question the purpose of his relentless drive. The thrill of the deal, the satisfaction of crushing a competitor, these were the only emotions that registered with any intensity. He had even established a charitable foundation, a gleaming facade designed purely for public image, a means to deflect criticism and polish his already formidable, yet tarnished, reputation. He attended the occasional gala, offered a perfunctory smile for the cameras, and then retreated to his isolated world, the charitable acts feeling as hollow as his own existence. His daily routine was an unvarying ritual. Dawn broke over the city, finding Arthur already awake, reviewing market reports in his private study. A private jet stood perpetually ready on the tarmac, whisking him across continents for high-stakes board meetings. Evenings were spent in the sterile environments of executive lounges or the silent grandeur of his empty mansion. There was no family to welcome him home, no loved one to share a quiet moment with. The absence of genuine human warmth was a constant, though unacknowledged, companion. Occasionally, a recurring dream would disturb the carefully constructed serenity of his nights. It was always fragmented, a kaleidoscope of blurred faces and hushed whispers, always ending with a feeling of profound loss, a sense of something irretrievably broken. He would wake with a start, the lingering unease quickly brushed aside by the imperative demands of the morning's agenda. From his penthouse, the sprawling metropolis below, with its countless lives intertwining, served only to underscore his profound isolation. He was a king in his castle, but a king without a kingdom of the heart. A crucial business deal, a multi-billion-dollar acquisition that would solidify his legacy, was on the horizon, demanding every ounce of his formidable attention. It was a complex, intricate dance of power and strategy, the kind of challenge that usually invigorated him. Yet, lately, a flicker of something else, a fleeting moment of introspection, sometimes intruded. A question, unbidden and unwelcome, would surface. Is this all there is? He would dismiss it instantly, pushing it back into the depths from which it arose, focusing instead on the cold, hard facts of the ledger, the undeniable allure of power. The world outside his gilded cage was a blur, a distant hum, and Arthur Sterling was content, or so he believed, to remain untouched by its messy, unpredictable realities. His carefully constructed world was about to be irrevocably shaken. His carefully constructed world was about to be irrevocably shaken. It began subtly, an almost imperceptible tremor in the meticulously ordered landscape of his life. For Arthur, venturing beyond the sterile confines of his corporate towers and luxury enclaves was a rarity, a deviation from his established pattern. Yet this day called for such an anomaly. A potential property acquisition, a sprawling, dilapidated complex in a less affluent part of the city, required his personal assessment. His analysts had presented the data, the projections were solid, but Arthur possessed an almost primal instinct for real estate, a need to feel the ground, to gauge the potential with his own eyes. His armored, tinted SUV glided silently through streets unfamiliar to him, a stark contrast to the manicured boulevards he usually frequented. The buildings here were older, the paint peeling, but a vibrant energy pulsed through the neighborhood, a symphony of street vendors' calls and children's laughter. The driver, a stoic man named Jenkins, navigated the narrow lanes with practiced ease, eventually pulling up near a small, somewhat neglected public park adjacent to the property Arthur intended to inspect. Arthur, clad in a bespoke suit that seemed almost an affront to the casual surroundings, exited the vehicle, his gaze sweeping over the park as he waited for Jenkins to secure the car. That was when he saw them. A group of 4 children, oblivious to the world around them, engrossed in a spirited game of tag near a rusty swing set. Their movements were fluid, their joy infectious, a stark, almost painful contrast to the quiet, solitary existence Arthur had crafted for himself. He watched them for a moment, a fleeting, uncharacteristic pause in his perpetually driven schedule. Then the world tilted. A sudden, shocking realization slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. His breath hitched in his throat, and the meticulously constructed walls around his emotions threatened to crumble. The children, their faces. It was as if he had stumbled upon ghosts from his own past, apparitions from a forgotten album. They bore an uncanny, undeniable resemblance to him, to the photographs of himself as a boy, tucked away in a dusty drawer in his sprawling, empty mansion. Initial disbelief warred with an overwhelming sense of unease. It was impossible, a trick of the light, a figment of his overactive imagination. Yet the longer he looked, the more pronounced the similarities became. The same piercing blue eyes, framed by dark, unruly hair. The same sharp jawline, even in their youthful softness. The way one of them, a girl with an impish grin, tilted her head when she laughed. It was a gesture he'd seen in old home videos of his own childhood. His business agenda, the multi-million-dollar acquisition that had brought him to this forgotten corner of the city, completely vanished from his mind. He found himself discreetly observing them, his usual air of detached authority replaced by a profound, almost desperate curiosity. He leaned against the polished fender of his SUV, feigning interest in his phone, but his eyes were fixed on the children, their playful interactions, their visible joy, their uninhibited laughter. It was a stark, almost painful contrast to his own childhood. A solitary existence spent mostly with nannies and tutors, devoid of such spontaneous, unburdened happiness. He remembered the rigid schedule, the endless lessons, the quiet expectation of achievement that had always hung over him. An almost involuntary urge compelled him to pull out his phone, scrolling through his gallery until he found it, a digitized photo of himself at roughly their age, solemn-faced, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, even then. He held the phone up, covertly comparing the image on the screen to the living, breathing children before him. The striking similarities in their eyes, their hair, the precise curve of their facial structure were undeniable. His heart hammered an erratic rhythm against his ribs. A sense of déjà vu washed over him, not just a feeling, but a memory trying to surface, a whisper from a long-suppressed past. He felt a cold dread intertwine with a strange, burgeoning warmth he hadn't known in decades. He watched as the children's game finally wound down, and an older woman, her face kind but etched with the lines of weary resilience, called them over. She was presumably their guardian, her gentle authority evident as she gathered them close, wiping a smudge of dirt from one boy's cheek. Arthur watched them walk away. The image of their faces burned into his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling, the unsettling certainty that he had just witnessed something profoundly significant. The property acquisition was forgotten. His empire, his legacy, his carefully constructed solitude, all seemed insignificant in the face of this inexplicable encounter. Driven by an unshakable curiosity, a primal instinct he rarely acknowledged, Arthur Sterling made a decision. He would investigate further. He had to know. The implications, he knew, could shatter the very foundations of his existence. Arthur Sterling, a man accustomed to having answers at his fingertips, found himself in uncharted territory. The images of those 4 children, their faces an unnerving echo of his own youth, had burrowed deep into his consciousness, displacing the usual calculative thoughts of mergers and acquisitions. He wasted no time. The following morning, a discreet meeting was arranged with one of the city's most reputable private investigators, a man known for his silent efficiency and impenetrable discretion. Arthur provided vague instructions, a testament to his ingrained secrecy, even in the face of such a personal upheaval. He described the park, the approximate time, the general appearance of the woman, and the startling resemblance of the children to himself. He deliberately withheld the full extent of his suspicions, a subconscious reluctance to vocalize the truly improbable nature of his fears and hopes. The investigator, a lean, unassuming man named Davies, listened with a practiced, impassive gaze, nodding occasionally as Arthur spoke. He asked precise, minimal questions, already formulating a strategy. His task was simple: identify the children, their guardian, and gather basic background information, all without raising suspicion. Arthur, meanwhile, found himself increasingly distracted. Board meetings became a blur of half-heard proposals, his signature on documents almost automatic. His executive assistant, Mrs. Albright, a woman who had served him for decades and knew the subtle nuances of his moods better than anyone, noticed the shift. His usual laser-like focus was fractured, replaced by periods of distant contemplation. His gaze, often fixed on nothing in particular. He dismissed her polite inquiries with curt assurances that he was merely contemplating a new strategic direction, but even he knew the lie rang hollow. The unsettling encounter had opened a floodgate of fragmented memories, long suppressed by the relentless pursuit of wealth and power. He found himself drifting back to a brief, passionate relationship from his early 20s, a whirlwind romance that had ended as abruptly as it began, swallowed by his burgeoning ambition and a callous disregard for anything that didn't directly serve his future. The details were hazy, almost dreamlike now, like scenes from an old, faded film. He remembered laughter, shared secrets under a starlit sky, and a fierce, uncomplicated affection that had felt both exhilarating and terrifyingly vulnerable at the time. He had walked away, convinced it was a necessary sacrifice for his destiny, never looking back. Now, a strange, unfamiliar sensation began to gnaw at him. Guilt. It was a feeling he rarely experienced, a weakness he had long purged from his emotional repertoire. He had always justified his actions, his ruthless decisions, as necessary steps on the path to success. But this felt different. This wasn't about business. It was about lives, potentially his own blood, and a past he had callously discarded. He spent hours in his study, a room usually reserved for financial reports and legal documents, poring over old photographs. He searched for clues, for any tangible link to that forgotten chapter of his life. He found pictures of himself, young, confident, almost arrogant, but nothing of the woman. It was as if he had deliberately erased her from his personal history, a testament to his own cold efficiency. Then Davies' first report arrived. It was concise, professional, and delivered via encrypted channels, as per Arthur's instructions. The children, 4 of them indeed, 2 boys, 2 girls. Their names were Leo, Max, Sophia, and Isabella. Their ages were confirmed, 8 years old. The information hit Arthur with the force of a physical blow, 8 years old. The number echoed in his mind, a chilling confirmation of his deepest fears and a dawning, terrifying realization. 8 years ago. That was precisely the time frame of his brief, passionate relationship, the one he had so ruthlessly ended. The ages aligned suspiciously, perfectly, with his past entanglement. The vague unease solidified into a concrete, horrifying possibility. His carefully constructed world, built on solitude and ambition, suddenly felt precarious, teetering on the edge of a revelation that promised to redefine everything he thought he knew about himself. The seeds of doubt had germinated, taking root in the barren soil of his heart, and Arthur knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified him, that his life was about to change irrevocably. The investigators' deeper dive into the lives of the children, as meticulously detailed in the subsequent, more comprehensive report, peeled back layers of Arthur's carefully constructed obliviousness. The name, stark and undeniable, leaped from the page. Maria. It was her. The woman from his past, the one he had so cruelly abandoned, her memory now resurrected from the dusty corners of his mind with an almost painful clarity. The revelation struck Arthur with the force of a physical blow, a visceral punch to his gut that left him gasping for air in the sterile confines of his penthouse office. A wave of regret, cold and sharp, washed over him, quickly followed by a searing shame he hadn't felt in decades. His carefully cultivated image of the unfeeling magnate, impervious to emotional turmoil, crumbled around him. The report painted a vivid, almost heartbreaking picture of Maria's struggles. It detailed her unwavering dedication to her 4 children, born into a world of hardship and scarcity, yet nurtured with boundless love. Arthur read of her long hours working multiple menial jobs, her tireless efforts to provide for Leo, Max, Sophia, and Isabella, her constant fight against poverty. Every sacrifice, every late night, every worn-out pair of shoes, all for the sake of these children he had unknowingly fathered. The words on the page were not mere facts, they were accusations, each one a stark reminder of his own selfishness, his ambition that had blinded him to the human cost of his actions. His past, once a distant, almost celebrated narrative of relentless self-made success, was now replayed in his mind, painted in a new, harsh light of betrayal and abandonment. He had been so consumed by his own ascent, so convinced of his singular destiny, that he had obliterated any trace of human connection that might have slowed his climb. The investigators' meticulous details included Maria's current modest life, her small apartment in a bustling working-class neighborhood, far removed from the gilded cages Arthur inhabited. He learned of the community center where she volunteered, the local school her children attended, the small everyday joys and sorrows that made up their existence. It was a world he had deliberately left behind, a world he had judged as beneath him. And now it was the world that held the most precious, vital parts of himself. A profound sense of responsibility began to settle upon him, heavy and suffocating, coupled with an almost unbearable guilt. He, Arthur Sterling, the man who prided himself on his ruthless efficiency and emotional detachment, was now drowning in a sea of remorse. The idea of confronting Maria and the children, of facing the consequences of his past choices, churned in his stomach. How could he possibly explain his absence? What words could possibly justify 8 years of deliberate neglect? The weight of his choices pressed down on him, a crushing burden that stole his sleep and gnawed at his waking hours. He paced his penthouse suite, the city lights a blur outside his floor-to-ceiling windows, each step echoing the turmoil within. He, who had always dictated terms, now found himself utterly at a loss, powerless in the face of his own moral reckoning. He considered sending money anonymously, a vast sum that would surely alleviate their struggles. But the thought felt hollow, a cowardly attempt to buy his way out of responsibility, a continuation of the very detachment that had led him here. No, that wouldn't suffice. It wouldn't erase the years of absence, the mother's quiet suffering, the children's lack of a father figure. He had to do more, be more, he had to face them. But how? How could he, a man who had forged an empire by avoiding emotional entanglements, possibly navigate this treacherous, deeply personal terrain? The question hung in the opulent air of his office, unanswered, yet demanding an immediate, profound shift in his entire existence. He knew with an unsettling certainty that his life, once a monument to solitary ambition, was about to be irrevocably intertwined with the lives he had so carelessly created and then abandoned. He had to meet them. There was no other path to atonement, no other way to reclaim a piece of the humanity he had sacrificed on the altar of his own success. The decision, though terrifying, felt undeniably right. Arthur Sterling, a man accustomed to commanding fortunes and shaping markets, now found himself charting a course through unfamiliar emotional territory. The direct confrontation he initially contemplated, a blunt force approach typical of his business dealings, felt utterly inappropriate, even callous, given the delicate nature of the situation. He needed to be subtle, to observe, to understand the dynamics of this family he had unknowingly created. Thus, he devised a plan to approach Maria and the children indirectly, a calculated maneuver designed to gain insight without immediately shattering their fragile peace or revealing his identity prematurely. His charitable foundation, a well-oiled machine primarily serving as a public relations tool, suddenly presented itself as the perfect cover. It was a ready-made vehicle for benevolence, allowing him to extend an olive branch, albeit an anonymous one, without exposing his true intentions. He meticulously arranged for a significant donation to a local community center, specifically the one Maria frequented, as identified by his private investigator. The donation was substantial enough to be impactful, yet carefully calibrated not to raise undue suspicion within the center's administration. He framed it as a new initiative targeting underprivileged families in that specific district, a move that would naturally draw him into the center's orbit. The opportunity arose swiftly in the form of a community event, a modest summer fair organized by the Center for Local Families. Arthur, shedding his usual bespoke suits for a more understated, yet still impeccably tailored, casual ensemble, attended the event. He moved through the bustling crowd, a ghost in plain sight, his incognito presence a stark contrast to his usual grand entrances. He wore dark sunglasses, a wide-brimmed hat, and maintained a detached air, blending into the periphery while his senses were acutely tuned to one family. From a discreet distance, he watched Maria. She moved with an easy grace, her laughter echoing amidst the joyful chaos of children's games. He observed her strength as she patiently untangled a kite string, her warmth as she shared a joke with a fellow volunteer, her unwavering dedication as she guided her children through the various activities. There was a quiet dignity about her, a resilience that spoke volumes of the hardships she had endured and overcome. It was a stark reminder of the woman he had once known, but now imbued with a depth and maturity born of motherhood and struggle. Then, his gaze shifted to the children. Their personalities, previously mere statistics in the investigator's report, began to emerge in vivid detail. The eldest, a boy, exhibited a protective streak, keeping a watchful eye on his younger siblings. One of the girls possessed a mischievous twinkle in her eye, always on the verge of laughter, while another displayed a quiet thoughtfulness, observing the world around her with intense curiosity. The youngest, a boisterous boy, seemed to embody boundless energy and unbridled joy. He saw glimpses of himself in each of them, the same determined set of the jaw in one, the piercing intensity of his own eyes in another, a flash of his quick wit in their playful banter. He noticed the same defiant curl of a lip, the inherited wave in their hair, the way they tilted their heads when listening intently. It was an overwhelming, almost surreal experience, witnessing these small manifestations of his own genetic legacy, traits both good and bad, reflected back at him from faces he had never known. A moment of near recognition sent a jolt through him. The thoughtful girl, pausing from her game of hopscotch, turned her head slightly, her eyes seeming to linger on him for a fraction of a second too long. His heart pounded, a primal fear of exposure mingling with an unexpected surge of longing. He quickly averted his gaze, melting further into the crowd, his breath held tight. Had she seen something, felt something? It was an unnerving sensation, this sudden, inexplicable pull towards these children. a connection he had never anticipated, never even considered possible. He continued to observe them, his initial scientific curiosity giving way to a profound, aching realization. He had missed everything. The scraped knees, the bedtime stories, the proud smiles at small victories, the comforting hugs after minor disappointments. He had missed the messy, beautiful, utterly irreplaceable tapestry of their childhood. The sheer depth of what he had forfeited, the years of shared laughter and tears, settled upon him with a crushing weight. He, who had always meticulously calculated gains and losses, now understood the immeasurable cost of his ambition. As the afternoon waned and the crowd began to disperse, Arthur felt an immense sadness wash over him. He knew he couldn't stay hidden forever, that this clandestine observation was merely a preamble to the inevitable, far more difficult truth. He slipped away from the community center, the sounds of distant children's laughter fading behind him, leaving with a heavy heart. The carefully constructed walls around his emotions had begun to crack, exposing a vulnerability he hadn't known existed. The decision to meet them, to truly face them, had been made. Now the question was not how, but when, and what the consequences would be. The path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but for the first time in a long time, Arthur Sterling felt a glimmer of purpose beyond the pursuit of wealth. He knew, with an unsettling certainty, that his life, once a monument to solitary ambition, was about to be irrevocably intertwined with the lives he had so carelessly created and then abandoned. He had to meet them. There was no other path to atonement, no other way to reclaim a piece of the humanity he had sacrificed on the altar of his own success. The decision, though terrifying, felt undeniably right. Arthur Sterling, burdened by the revelations at the community center, understood that the time for indirect observation had passed. The images of his children, vibrant and full of life, had etched themselves onto his mind, making his previous existence seem hollow and colorless. He had to face Maria. The thought of it churned his stomach, a sensation unfamiliar to a man who routinely closed multi-million-dollar deals without a flicker of nerves. He arranged a private meeting, carefully crafting the invitation to sound like a follow-up to the Foundation's donation. It was a flimsy pretext, but the only one he could conceive that might compel Maria to meet him alone. The day of the meeting arrived, bringing with it a palpable tension that settled in Arthur's opulent office. He paced, his expensive shoes silent on the plush carpet, rehearsing words he knew would fail to capture the enormity of his regret. When Maria finally arrived, escorted by his assistant, she was a vision of cautious resilience. She carried herself with a quiet dignity. Her eyes, though guarded, held a spark of the fierce spirit he remembered. She sat opposite him, her hands clasped in her lap, her posture polite but unyielding. Arthur found himself struggling for breath, his throat unexpectedly tight. His usual commanding presence had evaporated, replaced by an awkward vulnerability. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. "Maria," he began, his voice a little hoarse. "Thank you for coming. I wanted to discuss the community center donation further, but there's something else, something far more important, I need to say." He paused, searching her face for any sign of recognition, but her expression remained impassive, a mask of weary politeness. He took a deep breath, the confession a bitter taste in his mouth. "I saw your children, Maria, at the center. They look like me, like I did when I was their age." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Maria's initial wariness morphed into a flicker of shock, a subtle widening of her eyes, a slight tremor in her clasped hands. The polite facade began to crack, revealing a raw vulnerability beneath. Then, a wave of anger washed over her features, transforming her quiet dignity into a storm of righteous fury. "You saw them!" she spat, her voice low and trembling, yet laced with an undeniable power. "After all these years, after you walked away without a second glance, you have no right, Arthur, no right to watch them from the shadows, like some phantom." Her words were like daggers, each one piercing through the carefully constructed armor he had worn for decades. She rose from her seat, her voice gaining strength with each word, the years of suppressed pain finally finding an outlet. Do you have any idea what it was like, Arthur? Raising 4 children, alone? Wondering where the next meal would come from? How I would pay for their school books? How I would explain why their father was never there? Her voice cracked, tears welling in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Every scraped knee, every feverish night, every triumph and every heartbreak, I faced it alone. While you were building your empire, I was building a family. Piece by agonizing piece. He listened, his head bowed slightly, receiving her accusations like a penance. He had expected anger, but the visceral depth of her hurt, the raw betrayal in her voice, was far more devastating than any financial loss he had ever incurred. He had inflicted this pain, this profound injustice, and there was no amount of money that could erase it. He wanted to interrupt, to explain, to beg for forgiveness, but he knew he had no right. He had to let her speak, to bear the full weight of his past actions. Maria continued, her voice thick with emotion. I resented you, Arthur, for your absence, for your cowardice, for the life you denied them. But more than that, I resented myself for ever believing in you, for ever thinking you were capable of love beyond your own ambition. She wiped a tear that finally escaped, her gaze hardening. They are good children, Arthur. Kind, resilient, loving, everything you are not, and they are mine. I raised them, not you. When she finally finished, the silence in the room was deafening, punctuated only by Maria's ragged breaths and Arthur's heavy heart. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers, devoid of his usual arrogance, filled only with shame and a profound sorrow. You're right, Maria, he said, his voice barely a whisper. You are absolutely right. I have no excuses. I was a fool, a selfish, arrogant fool, and I am so sorry. For everything. For the pain I caused you, for the years I stole from them. I don't expect your forgiveness, not yet. But I needed you to know that I understand. I hear you, and I am profoundly, truly sorry. It was an apology he had never uttered in his life, a surrender of pride he never thought possible. Maria stared at him, her anger slowly giving way to exhaustion. The emotional toll of the confrontation was evident on her face. Sorry doesn't fix 20 years, Arthur, she said, her voice softer now but still firm. It doesn't bring back the missed birthdays or the empty chair at Christmas. I need time. Time to process this, time to think about what, if anything, this means for me and for them. She stood up, her gaze unwavering. Don't contact me again. Not unless I reach out to you. I need to decide, for their sakes, what comes next. With that, she turned and walked out, leaving Arthur alone in his vast, silent office, the echoes of her pain reverberating in his ears. The meeting had ended, but the true confrontation, the one with his own conscience, had only just begun. The weight of Maria's words pressed down on Arthur, in crushing burden he had never anticipated. He remained in his office, the opulent surroundings now feeling hollow and mocking long after she had departed. The silence, once a comfort, had become a torment, filled with the reverberations of her justified anger and his own burgeoning remorse. He understood her need for space, her demand for time, but the uncertainty gnawed at him. He could not simply sit idly by. This was not a business deal he could force, but a fragile human connection he desperately sought to mend. Driven by an unfamiliar urgency, Arthur spent the next few days crafting a letter to Maria. His usual succinct, businesslike prose gave way to an outpouring of genuine emotion, something he hadn't allowed himself in decades. He wrote of his profound regret, his shame for his past actions, and his dawning realization of the immense void his absence had created in their lives. He acknowledged her strength, her unwavering dedication to their children, and offered a sincere, heartfelt apology for the pain he had inflicted. More than that, he outlined his unwavering commitment to them, expressing his fervent desire to be a part of their lives, not as a replacement for the father they never had, but as a presence, a support, a constant. He pledged financial stability, not as a bribe, but as a means to alleviate the burdens she had shouldered alone, an emotional support, promising to be present, to listen, to learn. He sealed the envelope with a trembling hand. a gesture alien to the man who usually dictated terms, not pleaded for understanding. Maria received the letter days later, her initial reaction a complex mix of skepticism and a flicker of something resembling hope. She reread his words multiple times, searching for the familiar arrogance, the manipulative undertones she expected. Instead, she found what seemed to be a raw, unvarnished confession, a genuine plea for a chance. The man who had abandoned her had, it seemed, finally confronted his own humanity. The idea of him, the renowned Arthur Sterling, humbled and apologetic, was almost inconceivable. Yet the sincerity in his writing resonated with her. She knew she couldn't simply dismiss it. Her children deserved to know the truth, to have the opportunity to connect with their biological father if they chose. Gathering her courage, Maria sat her 4 children down, her heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension and resolve. She spoke calmly, carefully, explaining their father's existence, the circumstances of their birth, and his recent reappearance. She presented Arthur's letter, allowing them to read his words for themselves. The children's reactions were, as Maria had anticipated, a kaleidoscope of emotions. The eldest, a thoughtful girl named Elena, exhibited a quiet curiosity, her eyes wide with questions she couldn't articulate. The boisterous twins, Leo and Lucas, were a mix of confusion and apprehension, their usual playful energy subdued. And little Sophia, the youngest, looked simply bewildered, clutching her worn teddy bear tighter. They asked questions, some innocent, some surprisingly profound, about this stranger who was suddenly their father. Maria answered as honestly as she could, shielding them from the harshest edges of her own pain, focusing on the potential for a future where they might have both parents. Despite her own lingering hurt, Maria saw the potential benefit for her children's future, a future where they wouldn't have to struggle as she had. She saw the longing in their eyes, a desire for answers, for connection. After much deliberation, she agreed to allow Arthur to meet them, but under strict, non-negotiable conditions. The meetings would be supervised, brief, and entirely on her terms. She would protect her children from any further heartbreak, even if it meant risking her own. Arthur received Maria's call with a surge of relief that bordered on elation. He had been holding his breath, an uncharacteristic state of suspense for the man who controlled empires. The news that she would allow him to meet his children filled him with an unprecedented nervousness. His usual meticulous planning for business negotiations seemed trivial compared to the preparations for this momentous encounter. He wanted to make a good impression, to show them he was not the cold, distant figure he had been. He found himself in toy stores, a place he hadn't entered since his own distant childhood, carefully selecting thoughtful, age-appropriate gifts. He chose items that encouraged creativity, learning, and play, reflecting the father he now aspired to be, rather than the detached benefactor he could easily have become. His assistant, a stoic woman who had served him for years, observed the subtle but profound shift in his demeanor. The sharp edges of his personality seemed to soften, his priorities visibly altered. He spent hours reflecting on the kind of father he wanted to be, a stark contrast to his own emotionally distant upbringing. He envisioned shared laughter, quiet conversations, moments of connection he had never known. The day of the meeting arrived, thick with anticipation and dread. Arthur dressed in a casual yet distinguished manner, eschewing his usual power suits for something more approachable. His palms were clammy, his heart hammering against his ribs. He arrived early at the neutral location Maria had chosen, a quiet community center, and waited. As Maria and the children entered, a small, almost imperceptible smile touched Maria's lips, a tiny glimmer of hope that spoke volumes. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was an acknowledgement, a fragile opening, a sign that perhaps, just perhaps, this unprecedented journey might lead to something beautiful. Arthur watched them approach, his breath catching in his throat. Maria led the way, her expression a careful blend of caution and resolve. Behind her, the 4 children huddled together, a small, wary unit. He saw Elena first, her dark eyes, so like his own, darting around the room, assessing. Leo and Lucas, the twins, clung to Maria's coat, their usual boisterousness replaced by a quiet solemnity. And then there was Sophia, barely a toddler, her face a miniature replica of his own childhood photographs, her thumb in her mouth, gazing up at him with an innocent curiosity that pierced his carefully constructed composure. The initial interaction was a symphony of awkwardness, a dance of hesitant gestures and strained silences. Arthur, usually so adept at commanding rooms and closing deals, found himself stumbling over simple pleasantries. He knelt down, attempting to meet them at their eye level. A gesture that felt both foreign and utterly necessary. He introduced himself, his voice a little rougher than usual, and offered the gifts he had so painstakingly chosen. The children accepted them with polite, almost solemn nods, their shyness a palpable barrier. He tried to connect with them, sharing snippets of stories from his own childhood, carefully edited to be age-appropriate and relatable. He spoke of building forts and scraped knees, of pet dogs and starry nights, hoping to find a common ground, a spark of recognition. He asked about their interests, their favorite games, their dreams. Elena, the oldest, offered thoughtful, concise answers, her intelligence evident even in her quiet demeanor. He learned she loved to read, devouring books with an intensity that reminded him of his own youthful thirst for knowledge. The twins, Leo and Lucas, slowly began to thaw, especially when Arthur spoke of sports. He discovered Leo was a budding artist, his drawings vibrant and imaginative, while Lucas possessed an uncanny ability to solve puzzles. Arthur felt a surge of pride, a sensation he hadn't realized he was capable of feeling for anyone beyond his own accomplishments. He saw their unique personalities beginning to emerge, distinct and captivating. Sophia, the youngest, remained mostly silent, observing him with wide, unblinking eyes, occasionally offering a shy smile that melted something deep within him. Then, a moment of unexpected boldness broke through the polite veneer. Lucas, the puzzle solver, stepped forward, his small face serious. "Why did you leave us?" he asked, his voice clear and unwavering, cutting through the carefully constructed pleasantries like a sharp knife. The question hung in the air, raw and challenging, forcing Arthur to confront his past mistakes head-on without the usual corporate jargon or evasive tactics he employed in his business dealings. Arthur's breath hitched. He looked at Maria, who met his gaze, her expression unreadable, but firm. This was the moment of truth. He couldn't lie, not to these innocent eyes. He took a deep breath. "I was young and I was foolish," he admitted, his voice low but steady. "I made a terrible mistake. I didn't understand what I had, or what I was leaving behind. I was selfish, and I thought only of myself." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It was wrong, and I am truly, deeply sorry for every day that I wasn't there." His honesty was a revelation, not just to the children but to himself. He rarely admitted weakness, let alone regret. Maria, who had been observing the interactions with a quiet intensity, felt a subtle shift within her. His uncharacteristic vulnerability, his direct admission of fault, resonated with a part of her that still held on to the hope of justice, of acknowledgement. She saw the genuine pain in his eyes, a mirroring of her own past suffering. She knew it wasn't an easy admission for a man like him. As the initial shock of Lucas's question subsided, a small, genuine laugh bubbled up from Sophia. She had been playing with a colorful wooden puzzle Arthur had brought, and a piece had fit perfectly. Her innocent giggle, pure and unburdened, broke the tension that had gripped the room. It was a fleeting sound, quickly absorbed by the quiet conversation that resumed, but it was enough. It was a tiny crack in the wall, a hint of warmth that had been missing. The meeting ended with a tentative agreement for future visits. Maria, seeing the sincerity in Arthur's apology and the burgeoning connection with his children, consented to a more structured arrangement. It wasn't full forgiveness, but it was a step. As Arthur said his goodbyes, he noticed a subtle shift in the children's perception of him. Eleanor offered a small, shy wave. Leo and Lucas, while still reserved, exchanged a glance that seemed less wary. Sophia, clinging to her new puzzle, gave him another one of her heart-melting smiles. He left the community center feeling lighter than he had in years, a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with wealth or power and everything to do with the fragile, beautiful promise of family. He knew the path ahead would be long and challenging, but for the first time in a very long time, he felt a profound sense of purpose beyond himself. Arthur, now driven by a purpose far beyond his corporate ambitions, dedicated himself with an almost obsessive fervor to building genuine relationships with his children. The initial awkwardness of their introductions slowly began to dissipate, replaced by a growing familiarity and, tentatively, affection. He understood that this wasn't a business deal to be closed with a handshake. It was a delicate tapestry of emotions and experiences, woven thread by painstaking thread. He made regular visits to Maria's modest home, often arriving with not just gifts, but with an eagerness to participate in their lives, to truly see them. He found himself sitting on cramped living room floors, helping Elena with her elaborate drawings, marveling at her innate artistic talent, a trait he vaguely recognized in his own youthful sketches, long forgotten. He spent hours with Leo, patiently explaining the intricacies of a complex board game, witnessing the boy's sharp, analytical mind at work. Lucas, ever the curious one, peppered him with questions about his work, about the world beyond their neighborhood, and Arthur found himself simplifying complex economic theories into engaging stories, seeing the spark of understanding ignite in the boy's eyes. Even Sophia, with her boundless energy, found her way into his heart, teaching him the joy of simple, uninhibited play. He'd push her on the swings until his arms ached, his booming laughter echoing alongside hers, a sound he hadn't realized he was capable of producing. He taught them about his world, not through boastful tales of wealth, but through practical lessons. He showed them how to read a stock report, explaining the rise and fall of companies as if they were characters in a dramatic play. He shared anecdotes from his travels, describing bustling markets in far-off lands and the majesty of ancient ruins. In turn, he learned about their dreams, their struggles, their passions. He discovered Elena's secret fear of public speaking despite her artistic confidence, Leo's quiet ambition to become an engineer, Lucas's desire to write stories, and Sophia's unwavering conviction that she could fly if she tried hard enough. He listened. Truly listened, perhaps for the first time in his life, to the small, significant details of their days. Maria, observing these transformations, watched with a cautious but growing sense of relief. The bitterness she had harbored for so long began to recede, replaced by a grudging respect. Then, a fragile forgiveness. She saw the genuine effort Arthur was making, the way his eyes softened when he looked at their children. The patience he exhibited, a stark contrast to the impatient, driven man she remembered. She witnessed his attempts to connect, clumsy at first, but undeniably sincere. He wasn't just a benefactor. He was becoming a father. He was learning to be present, to be vulnerable, to be human. The children, sensing their mother's softening stance and experiencing Arthur's consistent presence, slowly began to open up. Their initial shyness gave way to a blossoming affection and trust. Elena would proudly present him with her latest drawings, seeking his approval. Leo would confide in him about school challenges. Lucas would share his fantastical story ideas, his imagination soaring. Sophia, with her innocent charm, simply demanded his attention, pulling him into her world of make-believe without hesitation. Arthur, in turn, experienced the profound joys and unexpected challenges of fatherhood. He learned patience when Sophia refused to nap, empathy when Leo struggled with a difficult math problem, and unconditional love simply by existing in their orbit. His cold, guarded exterior, forged by years of ruthless ambition and emotional detachment, slowly melted away, replaced by a genuine warmth that radiated from within. He found true happiness in their company, a happiness far more fulfilling than any financial triumph or corporate acquisition. The emptiness that had gnawed at his soul for decades began to fill with the vibrant chaos and boundless love of a family. One evening, while helping Lucas with a particularly challenging story plot, Arthur found himself sharing a vulnerability he had never revealed to anyone. He spoke about his own childhood, a desolate landscape of absent parents and emotional neglect. a stark contrast to the loving, if modest, home Maria had created. "I never really learned how to be a father," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper, "because I never really had one myself." Lucas, wise beyond his years, simply placed a small hand on Arthur's arm. "You're learning now," he said, his eyes filled with a compassion that stunned Arthur. It was a moment of shared vulnerability, a silent acknowledgement of their intertwined pasts and uncertain future. In that instant, a deeper bond formed between them, transcending the labels of father and son, becoming something more profound. The family, once fractured and unknown to each other, was slowly but surely weaving itself into a cohesive, loving unit, each thread strengthening the whole. Arthur, the millionaire who had once believed wealth was his sole purpose, was discovering a richness he never knew existed. However, this newfound tranquility, this precious tapestry of familial connection Arthur was so painstakingly weaving, was about to face an unforeseen and menacing threat. The past, a relentless hunter, refused to remain buried. Arthur's ruthless climb to the pinnacle of corporate power had left a trail of bruised egos and broken promises, and one particular casualty. A former business partner named Julian Thorne had nursed his grievances in the shadows for years, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. Thorne, a man whose ambition rivaled Arthur's own, had been mercilessly outmaneuvered and financially ruined by Sterling years ago. He had sworn revenge, a bitter oath whispered in the quiet corners of his ruined life, and now the universe seemed to be aligning to grant him his dark wish. Thorne, through his own network of informants and a relentless, almost obsessive pursuit of Arthur's vulnerabilities, eventually stumbled upon the existence of Maria and the children. It was a discovery that ignited a malevolent glee within him. He understood, with chilling clarity, that Arthur Sterling, the impenetrable titan of industry, finally had something to lose, something infinitely more valuable than any corporate empire. This hidden family, this burgeoning source of Arthur's quiet happiness, represented the perfect weapon, a way to inflict a wound far deeper than any financial blow. Thorne saw it not merely as an opportunity to hurt Arthur, but to dismantle the very foundation of his being, to tear away the nascent peace he had so recently found. The first signs of this impending storm were subtle, almost imperceptible at first. Anonymous threats began to surface, veiled warnings delivered through encrypted messages and untraceable emails, each one hinting at a deep, uncomfortable knowledge of Arthur's past and, more disturbingly, of his present. The messages spoke of old deals, forgotten transgressions, and the price of past betrayals. They were unsettling, designed to sow unease, but it was the increasingly specific references to his newfound family that truly sent a shiver down Arthur's spine. A mention of the 4 little blessings in one message, a casual inquiry about Maria's well-being in another, made his blood run cold. He felt a chilling certainty that his carefully guarded secret was no longer safe, that the walls he had built around his personal life were crumbling. Arthur, a master strategist in the cutthroat world of business, immediately recognized the hallmarks of a skilled adversary. He activated his security protocols, bolstering the protection around Maria and the children, discreetly hiring additional personnel. His mind, once solely focused on market trends and quarterly reports, now became a fortress of vigilance, constantly scanning for threats. He became increasingly paranoid, his every move calculated, every interaction scrutinized. The weight of his past decisions, the ruthless tactics he had employed to build his empire, now pressed down on him with suffocating force. He saw the danger he had inadvertently brought upon his innocent family, a consequence he had never anticipated. The thought that his children, who had just begun to trust him, could be exposed to the ugliness of his former life filled him with a profound and terrifying dread. Maria, attuned to the subtle shifts in Arthur's demeanor, soon became aware of the unsettling undercurrents. His late-night calls, his hushed conversations, the sudden appearance of unfamiliar faces discreetly guarding their home, these details did not escape her notice. Her initial concern quickly morphed into a deep-seated fear for her children's safety. She confronted Arthur, her voice laced with an anxiety she rarely displayed. What is happening? Arthur? Why are there strange men outside our house? What have you gotten us into? Her questions were a mirror, reflecting his own torment. He explained as best he could the resurfacing of an old enemy, the potential for exposure, the threat to their newfound stability. Maria listened, her face paling. The fragile hope she had begun to nurture for their future, momentarily overshadowed by a terrifying uncertainty. The children, too, sensed the palpable tension that had begun to permeate their home. The easy laughter became less frequent, replaced by hushed whispers and worried glances. They saw the strain in their mother's eyes, the furrow in Arthur's brow. Their innocent world, so recently brightened by the presence of a father figure, now seemed to darken with an unspoken apprehension. Arthur, witnessing their anxiety, felt a surge of protective fury. He had spent a lifetime building walls, guarding his emotions, but now, faced with the potential harm to his children, he found a primal resolve. He confronted his past actions, the consequences they now brought to bear, and the undeniable truth that his pursuit of power had created this monster. He vowed, with every fiber of his being, to protect his family at all costs, even if it meant sacrificing everything he had built. The former partner, Julian Thorne, finally made his public move, a calculated strike designed to inflict maximum damage. He leaked a carefully curated dossier of incriminating evidence to a sensationalist tabloid, detailing Arthur Sterling's cutthroat business practices, his alleged unethical dealings, and, most explosively, the existence of his secret family. The headline screamed, "Billionaire Sterling's secret shame, the love children he abandoned." It was a declaration of war, a direct assault on Arthur's carefully constructed public image, and, more devastatingly, on the sanctity of his private world. The battle for his family's peace had officially begun. The sensationalist tabloid's exposé detonated like a bomb, sending shockwaves through Arthur Sterling's meticulously crafted world. Julian Thorne's calculated leak had achieved its intended effect, thrusting Arthur's secret family into the harsh, unforgiving glare of public scrutiny. The media frenzy that ensued was relentless, a voracious beast feeding on every detail, every whisper, every photograph of Maria and the children. Paparazzi camped outside their modest home, flashing cameras illuminating their faces, transforming their quiet lives into a spectacle. Maria, once a beacon of quiet strength, found herself besieged, her every movement scrutinized, her children's faces plastered across front pages and television screens. The relentless harassment was suffocating, a constant reminder of the danger Arthur's past had unleashed upon them. Arthur's reputation, once unassailable, crumbled under the weight of the scandal. His carefully cultivated image as a philanthropic titan, a shrewd but fair businessman, lay in tatters. Board members called for emergency meetings, investors panicked, and the stock price of Sterling Enterprises plummeted. His empire, built on decades of ruthless ambition, now teetered on the brink of collapse. The financial losses were staggering, but for Arthur, the true cost was the anguish etched on Maria's face, the fear in his children's eyes. He saw the innocence being stripped away, replaced by a forced resilience that broke his heart. He knew he could not hide, could not run from this. The only path forward was through it, with unwavering honesty. Arthur called a press conference, the largest and most anticipated of his career. The room buzzed with 1,000 reporters, their cameras flashing like a storm. He stood before them, not as the arrogant billionaire they knew, but as a man stripped bare, humbled by his mistakes. His voice, usually commanding, was laced with a raw vulnerability. He began by acknowledging the reports, not denying a single word. He took full responsibility for his past actions, his abandonment of Maria, his ignorance of his children's existence. He spoke of his profound regret, his journey of rediscovery, and the immense love he now felt for his family. Then, with a strength that surprised even himself, he publicly acknowledged his children. "These are my children," he declared, his voice resonating with an undeniable truth. "They are innocent in all of this. They deserve peace, privacy, and above all, my protection." His words were not a plea for sympathy, but a defiant statement of ownership and love. He spoke of Maria's courage, her unwavering dedication as a mother, and his deep respect for her. It was a confession, a revelation, and a public declaration of love all rolled into one. The world watched, stunned by the transformation of the ice-cold billionaire. The aftermath of the press conference was immediate and profound. While some lauded his honesty, others condemned him further. The pressure on Sterling Enterprises intensified, the calls for his resignation growing louder. Arthur knew what he had to do. The empire he had dedicated his life to building, the vast fortune he had amassed, meant nothing compared to the safety and well-being of his family. In a move that shocked the financial world, Arthur Sterling announced his immediate resignation from Sterling Enterprises. He would divest himself of his controlling shares, effectively sacrificing his fortune, his life's work, for their sake. He would use his remaining liquid assets, carefully shielded from the corporate fallout, to secure their future, to provide them with a life free from want and fear. The family gathered in the living room, the quiet hum of the city outside a stark contrast to the storm raging within their small sanctuary. Maria sat beside him, her hand clasped in his, her eyes reflecting a mixture of sorrow and admiration. The children, usually boisterous, were subdued, their young minds grappling with the enormity of what was happening. "We have a choice," Arthur explained, his gaze sweeping over each of them. "We can try to weather this storm here, or we can find a new beginning, somewhere far away from all of this." He spoke of going into hiding, of severing ties with their old lives, of starting fresh under different names if necessary. It was a difficult decision, a wrenching sacrifice, but one he was prepared to make. A small hand reached out, tentatively touching his arm. It was young Leo, his eyes wide but resolute. "We'll go wherever you go, Dad," he said, his voice surprisingly firm. The other children echoed his sentiment, their faces mirroring Leo's determination. "We're a family," Isabella added, her voice soft but clear. "We stick together." In that moment, Arthur realized the true extent of his wealth. It wasn't in the billions he had amassed, but in the unconditional love and unwavering support of these 4 children, and the woman who stood by him. Tears, a sensation he rarely allowed himself, welled in his eyes. He knew then that sacrificing his empire was not a loss, but a profound gain. It was the ultimate act of love, the true measure of his redemption. The threat from Julian Thorne still loomed, a shadow over their fragile peace, but Arthur, now fueled by a purpose far greater than personal ambition, was ready. He had one final, dramatic move to make, a decisive action to neutralize the threat and secure his family's peace, once and for all. He would protect them, no matter the cost. His journey from ruthless tycoon to loving father had been arduous, but it had led him to this pivotal moment where the true meaning of his life lay not in power, but in protection. Arthur's resolve hardened, a cold, calculated fury replacing the fear that had gnawed at him. Julian Thorne had threatened his family, and that was an unforgivable offense. The former partner, blinded by his thirst for revenge, had underestimated the depth of Arthur's transformation. He might have relinquished his empire, but he had not lost his strategic mind, nor his formidable resources, now directed by a singular powerful purpose: protection. Arthur initiated a series of swift, decisive actions. He leveraged old alliances, called in favors that had been dormant for decades, and deployed a team of specialists with surgical precision. Thorne's financial vulnerabilities, meticulously catalogued by Arthur's intelligence network, were systematically exploited. Legal challenges, regulatory investigations, and carefully leaked information about Thorne's own illicit dealings began to surface, coordinated to create a perfect storm around his former adversary. Thorne, caught off guard by the ferocity and unexpected nature of the counterattack, found his own empire crumbling even faster than Arthur's had. The public, initially swayed by Thorne's narrative, now saw him for the vindictive opportunist he was. Within weeks, the threat was neutralized, Thorne's resources decimated, his reputation in tatters, and his ability to harm Arthur's family utterly destroyed. With the immediate danger averted, Arthur embraced a simpler life, a concept once alien to his very being. The vast penthouse, a symbol of his old life, was sold. Private jets and exclusive boardrooms were replaced by shared family meals and evenings spent reading stories. Their new home, a discreet estate nestled in a quiet, secluded valley far from the prying eyes of the media, became their sanctuary. It was a place where the children could run free, where Maria could cultivate a garden, and where Arthur could rediscover the rhythms of a life unburdened by corporate conquest. He dedicated himself entirely to his children and Maria, pouring into them the love and attention he had withheld for so long. He taught them about the stars, helped with their homework, and listened intently to their childhood woes and triumphs. He learned to bake terrible cookies and to laugh at himself, shedding the last vestiges of his old, rigid persona. True happiness, he discovered, lay not in the accumulation of wealth, but in the everyday moments. A child's joyful shout, Maria's gentle smile across the dinner table, the quiet satisfaction of a shared sunset. He found solace in the mundane, beauty in the ordinary, and profound contentment in the simple act of being present. Maria and Arthur, having navigated the treacherous waters of abandonment, anger, and forgiveness, began to rebuild their relationship. It was a foundation rooted in hard-won trust and a deep, abiding love that had weathered the storm. They communicated openly, their past mistakes serving as stark reminders of the cost of silence. Maria, once fiercely independent out of necessity, leaned into the partnership, realizing that support did not diminish her strength but amplified their shared joy. The children thrived in their new environment. Free from the shadow of public scrutiny and surrounded by unwavering love and stability, their personalities blossomed. They excelled in their studies, pursued new hobbies, and formed unbreakable bonds with each other and their parents. The laughter that echoed through their home was a constant melody, a testament to the healing power of family. Arthur, unable to completely abandon his innate drive to contribute, found a new outlet for his immense capabilities. He quietly funded community projects, focusing on education and sustainable development in underserved areas. He worked anonymously, his name never appearing on plaques or press releases, his motivation purely altruistic. His past experience, once a source of shame, now fueled a quiet determination to make a positive impact, one life at a time. His story, though largely unknown to the wider world, became a testament to human transformation and redemption within their small, close-knit circle. The ruthless billionaire, once lost in the pursuit of more, had found his true fortune in the embrace of his family. He often sat on the porch swing in the evenings, the children playing in the distance, Maria tending her flowers nearby. The setting sun cast long shadows, painting the valley in hues of gold and crimson. He would watch them, a profound sense of peace settling over him, a quiet smile gracing his lips. His journey, from the solitary heights of corporate power to the warm embrace of family, had been long and fraught with peril, but it had led him to this moment. Arthur Sterling, once defined by his billions, was now simply a father, a partner, a man truly at peace, his life's purpose finally realized. He had come home, not to a place, but to a feeling, a belonging that transcended all wealth.